Welcome everyone to another episode of the Network Buzz. I'm your host, Mike Trappe, here for another technical episode here, talking with Josh Arnold. Got you in the room here on the mics.
Yes,
how's it
finally.
going, Josh? I know, honestly, I love it. Having another engineer in here.
Yes,
you know,
I'm excited.
like Phil's been kind of tab that guy to speak technically to everything and be in the room all the time. So share the spotlight. It's good stuff. But we are here today to talk about virtualization alternatives and the VMware situation, as we'll call it. But before we dive in, you know, of course, you can find us on YouTube like you guys have been watching. I really appreciate everybody tuning in and all the likes and all the shares. Thank you very much. Please give us feedback of topics we could be discussing and, you know, how bad we are at our jobs. You know, please go ahead and dive into us that way. But we can find us again on Apple Podcasts, find us on Spotify and all those other streaming platforms now. So take a look there so you don't have to look at us all day and you can just kind of listen to our voices here. I've been told I got a face for radio, to throw the dad joke in there.
Well, I think I got
do.
the voice for it.
You
too.
actually do, John.
Yeah, see? we're bringing it.
Awesome. So, Josh, thanks for coming in here. We'll do a real quick professional. Real quick, because your specialties real quick, and then we'll dive into some personal stuff after that. But professionally, give us a little bit of background of, you know, what you've specialized in your technical career, just real quick. I know you've been at Lake Tech here for a little while here, but just let's kind of dive into the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as far as right now, you know, I've spent, 5.5 years at Lake Tech officially. So I've been in with managed services primarily for almost 15 years at this point. And specialized across, initially it was actually virtualization that I came to the table with, as far as professionally speaking. And I did some help desk, level 2 stuff initially in my career, but quickly, saw that the ticket wheel wasn't for me. And I wanted to understand.
Ticket wheel? Did I get?
Yes, ticket wheel of just, clock in, work through a ticket queue, and clock out. Like it's not enough to keep me engaged, and keep me curious. I've always wanted to know what was under the hood, how something worked, and that's where some of that engineering mentality is coming from. And it drove me and made me determined to understand the different products I was working with. And
love it.
Definitely gave me a ton of determination after hours on top of it all. So, I put in a lot of effort after hours, and I couldn't even tell you it was obscene for the first 6 years.
Passion.
Not
a hobby.
Definitely. It was supposed to be a hobby, and I saw it as an opportunity to hopefully earn a buck off. So,
always been in the MSP space, the vendor space.
Yeah, I mean, initially I was working for a corporate company, but shifted to an MSP or just general managed service providers, not necessarily a full IT, complete type service, but we specialized in, virtualization, primarily VMware. We were a very specialized VMware niche shop. So that's what I, initially was around for the first, 4 years professionally, is just VMware jobs and projects. So it's ironic, that we're having this conversation today, but as far as,
I'm learning more about you right now, to tell you the truth. I mean, we prepped a little bit, but that didn't come up.
So it's ironic to say the least, but a lot of that's, my initial foundational experience was VMware. Learning Microsoft and Windows and networking all came on top of it all. As far as beyond, level 2 support for kind of help desk role. And then I've, jumped across different MSPs over the course of my career, and here I'm at Lake Tech 5.5 years later. It's my longest at any MSP, and that tells you something.
It's a common story.
Yes.
People come around here. Yeah, mine too. I get that. Awesome. Well, outside of your obsession, that keeps you up your late nights. Summer's starting here. What else you getting into? Do a little personal stuff real quick. School is out for the kids. I know what that means for me, but we'll dive into what does that mean for you summertime wise? So, what you got going on?
Definitely kids. Yeah, we got them. It's gonna hopefully be a busy schedule, keeping them busy, occupied. My biggest thing is right now is keeping them reading, keeping them engaged over the summer, because we've fallen behind before, and COVID added a big hump in that learning curve for them. So, being 12, 13 years old, I just want to keep them engaged. We went to the zoo last weekend and got to be able to at least get out, enjoy the weather, and, hoping to repeat some of those outdoor events. Go some, camping is one of my goals as far as this summer.
Yeah, my son wants a camp. I already bought a tent and I'm hoping to
that's
use
awesome.
it. I'm
Yeah.
trying to. I'm not the outdoorsy guy, so I'm
Yeah,
trying to do that.
Oh, I'm a nerd, I'm not the outdoor very often.
I'm outdoor sports related. I'm not
No.
outdoor camping or fishing, and he wants to do that stuff. My son does.
Yes,
I
yes.
need to get better at that.
Yeah, so that'll be some of the adventures is fishing for sure. So my son probably knows a lot more than I do, but I do try. I try to, do some research online to get myself familiar with some of the terms and, just understand what, techniques are going to work better and time of the day of fishing and, when's the best time to catch bass and so forth. So, trying to get up to speed.
There you go.
Got to do the dad thing and,
Yep.
do it right for them and make their experience as best as possible, regardless how good or bad I am. I don't care about how good or bad I am. I want it to be about him and, being excited for it, for both my kids.
Good work, Dad. Well done. Well done.
So that'll be the primary focus, other than, continued education and, playing with some of this new stuff coming out. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
I know this is keeping you busy.
Yes.
In your time, not only projects, customer facing stuff, but just the lab work. And that's why another thing we're going to talk about today, and we'll transition right there. Yeah. Why we're here today is talking about just the virtualization market itself right now. On what Broadcom acquiring VMware. The dust has settled a little bit. I feel like where a lot of people have done research, we're hearing names of competitors come out of the woodwork that we never heard before. At least not me. You probably have. But that's the topic of conversation we're going to dive into today, and the virtualization market, and what we're hearing from customers, and what you're labbing up, and what people are getting excited about, and what they're migrating to, which may not fit them, but let's dive into all that here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a little origin, just to kind of set the table. I kind of want to build this story here. Virtualization in general, kind of the evolution of the virtualization marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, VMware has done what they've done, but I mean, if you want to go ahead and dive in with your knowledge and your late nights that you had, a lot more knowledge to pass on to everybody here.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going back 15 years, so right at that cusp of VMware getting mainstream. For myself, personally, experience-wise, they were 2009, 2010. They just released their version 4 of ESXi officially. That was huge, and they've already been gaining market share for virtualization. There's a big issue with the amount of servers that people had to have, physically speaking. I mean, they'd have hundreds of, physical servers that run each individual server and these applications that they were operating in their data centers. And I mean, the footprint was ridiculous. So, with virtualization was starting to peak and people were starting to see this technology is actually reliable, offered some great features and capabilities that even in the data centers, at that time, was still a challenge to be able to reproduce that type of resiliency without, a ton of engineering, and, additional infrastructure to, support those models. So, VMware definitely was a leader in that particular area specifically because they were able to produce the high availability feature. They were able to produce, snapshotting of virtual machines in the sense of, being able to capture in a moment of time before you make a change to a server. So that way you can revert very rapidly. And don't get me wrong, people have taken advantage of those things, those features, and not necessarily the greatest way, but those features are key to being able to, make changes in the environment and be able to roll back changes very instantaneously if needed in some cases.
All without breaking the bank either.
Yeah.
And you can have all these features, but like if it doesn't fit the budget, then that entry level into the market, like we were talking about, where it's just like it up and down the scope of customer size, like it fit everybody.
Yes. Yeah. They made a model that made the sense across the board on the marketplace. So, for $500, you were getting, some of the basic features for VMware, which was sufficient, especially for your SMBs. $1,500, you were getting high availability, and it's still a decent amount of money, but, for an Essentials Plus kit, you cover 3 physical servers for a SMB or mid-market, even in some cases. We were able to consolidate, 70, 80 servers, if not more, onto those 3 hosts, and that was sufficient for their needs. Decent storage, and you were off and running.
Roll with it.
And high availability, you could fail over and perform maintenance, and yeah, it was
simple,
very nice.
Simple for the customer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very simple.
Weird how common that story is. Yeah. And I mean, as time has passed here, and in 15 years forward, I mean, everybody's so ingrained in VMware. I feel like every customer you ever talked to, just like
Yep.
it was just like an afterthought of, it was not if they're using it, it's just a matter of how much.
Right.
The competitive landscape, I mean, you mentioned several others, in the beginning, but like, I mean, we didn't run into, occasional Hyper-V customer, but not really.
Right.
everybody was basically utilizing VMware to the fullest extent that they could.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's good reasons for that, right? Their footprint was real small on their hypervisor, which is a big key. With Hyper-V, there is some disadvantage there, that we have to call out. You're running Windows. How many times have you seen a blue screen of death? When it's just like, really, my virtualization solution is based on the same Windows-based system and, could blue screen and, everything's down. So, they had a very reliable, hypervisor. That was a big key for a lot of customers. And the patching and updating process was very simple. There wasn't a crazy, and support was amazing. Call those guys, they jump on phone, work with you directly.
Yeah, they didn't lose
work
customers
through
that
those.
way.
Yeah, no, it was great. So this is why they gained large amount of the market share. I mean, we were talking like 64% or something during that period, and there's some other competitive solutions as we've mentioned, Hyper-V, even Zen, is Zen server for, VDI, and some of these other virtualization solutions were on the table. But VMware was, leading the pack, bringing innovation to the table and developing new hardware compatibility and, beating Hyper-V to the table for how much of hardware they could support, how much memory and compute power they can add to these hosts to support the virtual machines, and how much I can consolidate in that as well. So that's a big key for especially larger businesses that becomes more and more an issue, as they continue to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, now that all this shift is occurring, now we hear new names.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we'll just dive into the market because now with Broadcom's acquisition, everyone's done their research, settled on a few. I mean, we were talking about just the evolution of the other competitors. Like everyone's trying to evolve very quickly, grab market share very quickly. And we hear all sorts of names that are coming out of the woodwork at this point now. And it's not really, the woodwork to say, but like people who didn't have any market share, who weren't evolving at that time now are really jumping in, and everyone's doing all their research to figure out how it could work for their specific environment. And that's the game, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the competitive solutions that are coming out is wild. I mean, we even have companies that are developing their own products at this point, trying to get into the market. So, they know the share's there. It's the wild, wild west for some people. And, some of these other new names that are coming out to the table, they're spending on marketing. They're trying to get their name out there as rapidly as possible.
Rushing it out at points
yes,
sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, it's very competitive right now. And I think there's lots of questions around what makes the most sense for any business.
Yeah, I know. And we were at a higher ed conference, OHEC, a few weeks back, and there had to be at least 3 or 4 sessions, like just living in the virtualization space and a component of it. And just like, it was a crowdsourcing of information about what's everybody getting into, what works for you. And I guess that's the biggest thing is in diving into all the research, everybody had a different answer.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to virtualization and even infrastructure wise, how it's all, created, how it all flows, how you're handling security and, microsegmentation came up, at data center, like the conversation just evolved kind of so much. But yeah, I mean, names that we know already, Hyper-V, of course, is kind of, been around for a long time, most well supported. HPE VM Essentials, the newer product HPE came out with. Virg.io was one that, we discussed with the customer, and then Proxmox, Nutanix, and we'll finish with talking about Azure Local because now you've done a bunch of research on that.
Yes.
But yeah, feelings on those competitors, talk about just all of those, one by one if you want to, but
yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting now that that's the landscape that that VMware is kind of created, and everybody's kind of jumping on board.
Right. Yeah. And then, when I was mentioning even some companies are developing some of these platforms, we got the HPE VM Essentials, it's very, very new. They're leveraging, existing technologies, KVM, and, they're integrating that with what they call Morpheus. So these are some technical tools that they're building to build their actual product that are kind of out there and available for, especially on the open source side. So they're leveraging some of these tools and bringing a actual product to market, leveraging those tools. So the, VM Essentials is very new to the table. We're still trying to get our feet wet with that and understand, where's it going to hit, how's it going to do. It does have a very look and feel for VMware, as far as the GUI goes, and the management. They're bringing some of these, features that are very comparable to VMware as well. So feature parity is mostly there for a lot of these products at that. If not, most of them have, high availability along with snapshotting options. I would say, one of the big, to me, one of the features that I see is like fault tolerance, which fault tolerance is a unique feature that VMware has where, you can run a shadow copy instance of your server infrastructure. You have to have identical infrastructure to do so. But it's very strict requirements to do this. Not many companies are doing this. I have yet to actually physically see it in any deployments, but there might be a use case where you have that and there's no competitive solution out there that exists. And usually when you're looking at it, that question, well, how do I move away from VMware if I'm in that boat? Well, there's usually other ways of doing things, as all IT comes to, right? There's more than one way to do this. We could do it via infrastructure, or we can start talking to our application vendors. How do we make this resilient in the way where if I lose hardware, it's still operating no matter what, 0%, 100% uptime on that application. So there's different ways and methodologies to get the same uptime result versus, some of these other features that VMware offers. So there's feature parity, right? And a lot of these products will meet a lot of the feature parities. It's not in the same way. They may be using different tools or even bolt-on tools to be able to get to the point of where vSphere is today with their VMware product.
That's the game. It's like, are we replicating exactly what existed,
right,
and trying to get up to speed with what the environment already felt and managing everything all together, or are you making sacrifices along the way there?
Right, and in some cases you may make sacrifices depending on which solution you're going to be looking at, what makes the most sense. I think regardless, there is a sacrifice that will be made as part of that transition. Whether or not you already have skilled engineers, right, that are on staff that are probably know VMware, and now you have to reskill all that, and they might be familiar with some of these other tools, that's great and dandy, but, that's not what they're certified in for the past 10, 15 years,
Right.
and now you're back at the game of, going back and get certifications relative to the product that you're deploying.
That's part of the decision.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean,
it should be.
if you're moving networks, if you're changing systems, regardless, it's always just, who's managing? Are you familiar with it? What's the uplift look like?
Yeah.
That's always the thing. Sorry, I'm trying to turn this off and I'm realizing it's loud. There we go.
Got it.
Yeah. We'll be fine temperature-wise.
The support comes to be
Yeah.
a big thing as part of that as well. So, I think that's the most critical piece, especially in production environments. When you're running business critical applications, support is a big key part of that. Without the proper skill set on staff to be able to just dive in and troubleshoot
Right.
and know they could dig into whatever possible issue there may be, support and having that arm to be able to call and be able to get a hold of somebody and walk through a down situation is important. We have like Proxmox that we bring to the table, as far as another solution. It's KVM based. So you'll hear KVM a lot outside of Hyper-V. It's Hyper-V's own, type of virtualization solution, but KVM is kind of a base foundational piece for virtualization technology. They do have support. You can pay for support, but there's specific time frames of when you can call support. It's not necessarily
And everybody's got their, support levels.
24/7 type
Right.
deal, right? And
Right.
those are important considerations as part of that. Especially if you're a 24/7 operation, weekends, like
Healthcare facility,
yeah,
like life or death situation of some machines work up or down.
critical
Yep.
to have that ability to be able to call and work through hardware or software related issues.
Mhm.
So, and that's with any vendor. So, we have Proxmox on the table as far as the technology. They've been around just as far as just as long from a KVM standpoint, the underlying technology. They've been around for very, very long time. I mean, KVM, it was even, produced around, I think it was, I don't know if it was 2007, but, it started coming more mainstream and seeing around that time frame. But the, with Proxmox, it's going to be a little different. It still has that same look and feel as VMware. kind of a more simplified interface, I would say,
Okay.
from that sense. So there's advantages there for some people.
We heard, and again, at that higher ed conference, that I had several people tell me, people much smarter than I, about how it was not as widely accepted in the enterprise space. It was more built for smaller environments.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, most of us are labbing this stuff out. We play with Proxmox at home, because it is free, it's open source, we can quickly update it. It's pretty easy to deploy. It's not anything, crazy. And we don't need any special licensing, right? So it's open source.
Free and open source, though, I'm sure brings up security questions.
Well,
People.
there's things that you have to consider there, right?
Yeah,
As
right.
part of that, open source is a whole different ballgame because, as soon as there's a exploit that's, available to rather a vulnerability that is available to exploit, it's paramount that that gets fixed as quickly as possible. Obviously, being open source, there's other people that are, very strong about making sure that gets patched as quickly as possible, but also the same people that may be malicious on the side
Right.
will know that exists, can look at the code and go at it
Right.
and start, exploiting that vulnerability. And that's a big deal. Because your reaction time has to be a little bit faster from my perspective when it comes to open source. But, and that's why, like, comparing it to Microsoft, like, all their codes, is closed, and you're not going to see that stuff from a virtualization standpoint. So, if there is a vulnerability, it's not necessarily exploitable, and it may not be publicly exposed for that vulnerability. So there may be a different timeline to be able to, patch up that particular vulnerability that's out in the wild. And there's those 0 days. They do happen. So, but there's still opportunity to close that up, and it's limited of who knows how to, exploit that vulnerability. So there's some advantages to that stuff.
Yeah, there's
and
give and
these are-
take, right? Yeah.
These are conversations that, their security teams are having. Well, how do we deal with that? Are we accepting open source or not? And that's what they're going to be talking about and what makes the most sense from a business aspect of, which solutions going the most sense.
Yeah, I know some customers just that's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
And it's just not happening then because they value security so much because they could be working on jet engines, what have you,
Right.
Situation. But yeah, that was Proxmox, and then finishing up probably Nutanix on that list.
Nutanix has been around. They used to have a tight integration with VMware, so it was more of almost an add-on product at one point. They have now since produced their own hypervisor in a sense and brought a lot more to the table on that side of the house, and now kind of really directly competing. Nutanix offers a hyper-converged infrastructure model.
Yep.
So this is a model where you're scaling based on compute storage and memory on per node or per server. So that model's interesting for some customers because it's very consistent. We're going to grow X amount. Well, we just add another node and now we have X more capacity and good to go. In some cases, these solutions do offer you the ability just to grow certain pieces and parts, but you got to do it to all of the nodes. Whatever you do to one, you're gonna do it to all. So it's a more consistent cost usually in that case.
It's not horrible scale though. It sounds like you're adding on piece by piece. I mean,
Yeah.
and plus using that more efficiently than adding a server on, where then you just needed just more space, and then you're slowly filling that.
Yes, yeah. So it's a little different methodology. The 3-2-1 model, you got your 3 hosts and 2 switches and a SAN. That tends to be the other way, right? If I want more storage, I add another shelf to my storage array. If I want more compute and memory, I add another node. So it's that could make more sense where my storage, I'm probably not going to grow. Okay, we have more of a static footprint there, so we just need compute and memory, and we see that growing. So there's 2 different models in that sense. Without talking about cloud in this model, when we're strictly on premises,
It's a different
infrastructure.
conversation. Yeah, it's a whole other 30 minutes.
Yeah. So
Very good. And so we kind of went through that list. Thank you for diving into all that and finishing off with Azure Local.
yeah,
And I know that's where you spent a lot of your time recently kind of researching that out. It's still, relatively new from my perspective, but I mean, dive into as to, the research you've done, labbing time you've done, and to why you've kind of settled into that as a go forward that could help customers a lot of different ways.
yeah. I think foundationally, right? Lake Tech, we're pursuing best of breed. So that has some pull of why we're going to focus on a Microsoft-based solution, right? We're very Microsoft 365 driven. We're already very Azure driven from a cloud aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing with a lot of cloud infrastructure. Azure Stack HCI, as it was formerly called, they rebranded it as Azure Local or renamed it. So it's been around for a while. This isn't necessarily something brand new to the table. It is something I think that's causing the market to shift a little bit because they did rebrand it, and now it's kind of like coming out as a potential competitive VMware solution. I wouldn't say it's necessarily 100%, a competitive solution, but what I will say is it is a hyper-converged infrastructure model. Originally, it was meant to be an edge solution. So when I say that, it's going to be, a server that gets deployed out to on-premises. You might already be very cloud.
Thank you for asking that own question.
So if you're almost all cloud on all your servers, there may be a use case where you need a server to be local. You might have a use case where you need low latency access to that server, or you want it closer to your end user, so you don't have tying up as much internet bandwidth. There's all sorts of use cases of why you might have an edge instance of a server. So, or bringing a local cache to, the local on-premises environment to the users to make things faster and, more productive for the users. So this Azure Stack HCI solution was, initially you could just deploy one server and throw down a server on that. And now you're serving local, employees or customers with that server. They've recently have continued to invest in that product and continuing to give it some, the new front face and way to deploy it, new ways of managing that as far as that goes. So when we're talking Azure, there's Azure Arc. This has been a big conversation, between multiple different things for on-premises infrastructure, because it starts giving you one pane of glass to manage it. So if you're already in Azure, you have some on-premises footprint, but Azure Local could be a great fit in this case because, you already have your foot in the door with Azure. You might be using something like Terraform and automation. You could be using a Hyper-V. Well, you can make that transition over to Azure Local to go to, completely being Azure managed. But Azure Arc could manage Hyper-V stuff as well. So there's
depends on what you already have.
Yeah, right.
Like we talked about, like a lot of people, customers we have this conversation with, it's what are you working with currently? No one's looking to totally just uplift everything they have in the infrastructure to, recreate everything.
Right.
It's more, money doesn't grow on trees for everybody. And that's why we're having this conversation is because they got this new potential bill from VMware. And it's like, okay, what can we do to manage this? Is it a hybrid solution?
Right.
Or what can we use our current infrastructure for to create a situation where we're not paying an arm and a leg, we're helping out the business that way, but we're also not, hurting our people when it comes to managing the system.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have people going more in a hybrid model. Okay, let's use, let's shift some of this workload and we'll still stay on VMware, but we're going to lower the amount of, servers we're virtualizing, on premises. So our footprint's not nearly as large, our cost is not nearly as large, and we'll push into the cloud on all the other infrastructure. So there's definitely different ways they're offsetting it and doing it. It's a matter of what makes the most sense. People that are very Linux driven, that are, running Linux server, I would say Hyper-V may not be the best, solution for that because they don't necessarily have a lot of support for, many Linux distributions out there. It would potentially be a Proxmox in this case, potentially, or, maybe you do have to stick with VMware just because of the nature of what you're running. There's specialized appliances, your vendors, they won't necessarily support those appliances running on Proxmox, let alone have native templates to be able to just deploy these appliances onto that stuff. So, and those are factors that have to be considered as part of that. We deal with like ClearPass as an example. So, we have to be cognizant of, well, what is it really supported on? And now KVM is again, a primary technology for a lot of these other third-party, solutions that are coming to the table. In a lot of ways, it probably is supported, but the vendor needs to explicitly say they support it. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's the game. It's like what with your system and the research everybody's doing, putting in it for their own situation.
Right.
Hybrid. pull it out and make that call. We're like, no, we cannot incur that cost. And they have their ROI model as to what they need to, fit that 5-year cycle budget and just what makes sense for them and what their current infrastructure looks like. I keep saying that because that's the topic we always discuss with everybody is like, how do I do this where it's just time that I have to spend?
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's a huge uplift, and for some customers, I mean, it just doesn't make sense financially. And it's going to be cheaper just to stay on VMware in this case.
Right.
So
yeah, when it comes to, to time management and everything. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's a big decision. It's a huge paradigm shift right now.
Right.
I mean, when this all came out, it was just like, well, what do we do? Well, Hyper-V. Oh, okay, great. But then what else is out there? And that's where all these conversations now take place. So like the number one thing that's discussed nowadays.
Oh yeah.
It's like whatever we're talking about, but also what's the purple elephant in the room? What are you guys doing with VMware at this point?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else I missed you want to add on to any other, technologies we discussed there?
Well, just trying to think off the top of my head here.
I think we covered everything that we could, that we discussed. And outside of that, it's just theme of the day. It's preserving investment in existing infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Got a good coverage there. I was just looking through as far as the, some of the hybrid stuff, but, I know cloud could be a whole nother conversation. I think we'll have to have
it's going to be another, yeah. I mean, I don't want to extend past their normal time here and how we usually do these things, but that's a whole other conversation is adoption to cloud and then all the tools from there.
Right.
But good stuff.
Absolutely.
That's conversation needs to be had. Everybody's already been having, and we're just kind of tying a bow on it from our perspective. But
100%.
It sounds like there's more to come though when it comes to just how we're labbing out Azure Local and just general market acceptance at that point as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I mean, I would say it's, there's people that are looking at it, and there's advantages and disadvantages, right? Of any of these solutions, it doesn't matter the way you look at it. So, the biggest thing is what makes the most sense, what you're skilled in, what the cost is, and so forth. So
yeah, and sharing that info in the community. Like, we met with one university and was just trying to expedite everyone's research about, what are you finding? What are you finding? And just generally using that community feel, everybody kind of share that knowledge.
Absolutely. Yes. No, it's a big key. And I think I think we'll still see even more competitors coming into the foot of, this particular area because it's on the loose for everybody.
Yep. Wild West, like you said.
Yes. 100%.
Cool. Well, Josh, this has been great. I mean, we're going to have more conversation, I feel like, here coming up. Now that you've gotten in here, had your first experience in the network buzz, and
I'm ready.
Using that radio voice of yours.
We got a lot to talk about. I'll tell you that. Yeah. There's a ton out there. So looking forward to it.
Cool. Thank you for jumping in here, Josh.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching another episode of Network Buzz. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on all your preferred podcast platforms. And thanks so much for spending the time. Talk to you guys soon.